In the early months of America's entry into the Pacific War, the Japanese High Command carried an air of unshakable confidence. Their pilots were veterans, molded in the skies of China and Southeast Asia, their aircraft lightweight, agile, and perfectly suited to the twisting dogfights that had defined the early years of the conflict. The Zero, especially, was spoken of like a national treasure. A machine so responsive that foreign pilots, the Japanese believed, could only marvel at its grace before being consumed by it. So when intelligence reports first mentioned a strange American twin-boom aircraft entering the theater, Japanese officers scoffed. They mocked the design, calling it clumsy, overweight, incapable of surviving a real dogfight. A twin-engine fighter? To them, it sounded like a joke. They didn't understand yet that this machine was built for a completely different kind of war, a war the United States was about to impose on the Pacific with overwhelming force. The P-38 Lightning did not burst onto the scene. It arrived like a storm front, crossing a calm horizon. It appeared at altitudes the Japanese fighter command rarely patrolled. It approached at speeds their early warning systems struggled to register, and when it dove, it did so with the fury of a falling planet. The first pilots who encountered it described the same eerie sensation. The Lightning was simply there, above them, behind them, beside them, all at once, attacking from angles no Zero or Hayabusa could hope to counter. Some Japanese pilots didn't even get the chance to react. They were flying, scanning the vast Pacific skies, when two streams of .50 caliber fire stitched across their fuselages and turned their aircraft into falling metal before they realized they were under attack. The Lightning fought a different style of war, a style the Japanese were completely unprepared for. While Japanese fighters relied on agility and low-speed maneuverability, the P-38 relied on raw engineering power. Two Allison engines roaring in perfect unison gave it a speed advantage the Japanese couldn't match. It could climb faster, dive harder, and disengage at will. It didn't have to win turning fights, it simply refused to enter them. American pilots learned quickly, never chase the Zero in a horizontal turn. Instead, use the Lightning's altitude superiority, firepower concentration, and ability to dictate the fight. Within weeks, Japanese pilots began noticing a terrifying pattern. Every time they tried to drag the P-38 into a traditional dogfight, the Lightning vanished upward, only to return seconds later in a deadly vertical strike. It was as if the sky itself was becoming a weapon in American hands. The deeper impact, however, came from something far greater than dogfighting. The P-38 introduced reach. It could fly distances no American fighter had ever flown. Suddenly, Japanese bombers, transports, escorts, none of them were safe. The Lightning extended American influence across thousands of miles, striking at bases and convoys the Japanese thought were beyond reach. They mocked the aircraft in the beginning, but as losses mounted, the laughter faded into a quiet, growing fear. They began flying in tighter formations, scanning the skies obsessively, waiting for the inevitable moment when the twin silver booms would appear out of the sun. Japan's veterans, who once accumulated victory after victory, now found themselves confronting an enemy who wasn't just competent. He was equipped with a machine built to break their momentum. And then came the turning point, the moment that shattered any illusion the Japanese still held about their superiority, the rise of Richard Bong. Bong flew the P-38 like it was an extension of his own instincts, executing lightning-fast ambushes with a precision that left Japanese pilots stunned. His victories forced the Japanese military to accept an uncomfortable truth. This wasn't just a new American fighter. It was the end of an era in which Japan dominated the skies. As the months passed, the psychological pressure exerted by the P-38 became just as devastating as its physical firepower. Japanese pilots were no longer launching missions with the confidence they once carried. Instead, they were checking the sky constantly, scanning the sun's reflection, waiting for the moment they feared most. The appearance of a glint of silver high above them, a glint that meant the Lightning was diving. What made it so terrifying wasn't just its speed or altitude, it was the sense of inevitability. The Lightning chose when to engage, and it chose when to disappear. Japanese pilots could no longer dictate the terms of the battle, and that loss of control began eroding morale in ways their commanders hadn't anticipated. American pilots reported intercepting Japanese formations whose pilots appeared tense, slow to respond, almost hesitant. The Zero was still deadly in the hands of an expert, but the Japanese were slowly losing their experts. Each time a seasoned pilot fell, he was replaced by someone less experienced, less confident, less capable of handling a machine that relied so heavily on finesse. Meanwhile, the United States was producing more P-38s, training more pilots, refining tactics, adapting its strategy. The war in the sky was no longer a duel, it was a total shift in momentum. The impact of the Lightning extended beyond fighter engagements. It began escorting bombers deep into Japanese-held territory, breaking up intercept attempts before they even formed. American crews reported feeling a wave of reassurance every time they saw the twin booms gliding beside them. The Lightning wasn't just a weapon, it was a shield, a symbol of the growing American dominance in the Pacific. The Japanese, however, saw it as something else entirely, a relentless predator. They could not outrun it. They could not outclimb it. They could not disengage from it. Every attempt to develop counter-strategies failed because the underlying truth was simple. The P-38 was a superior machine. By late 1943 and early 1944, the Japanese High Command began acknowledging privately what they refused to say publicly. The American technological advantage was overwhelming. The Lightning's range allowed it to strike bases previously considered safe. Its speed meant Japanese reconnaissance aircraft rarely returned. Its concentrated nose-mounted firepower tore through bombers and fighters alike. Every factor that once made the Zero dominant now worked against it. The Japanese had built a masterpiece of agility, but not a machine designed to survive heavy damage or compete in high-speed combat. Against the Lightning, these weaknesses became fatal. Stories began circulating within Japanese units. Stories of pilots who saw the Lightning appear behind them out of nowhere, of entire formations mauled before they could break. Some accounts described the psychological shock as worse than the physical danger. The Americans, once dismissed as inexperienced and unprepared, were now using tactics the Japanese had no answer for. The Pacific sky, once the hunting ground of Japanese aces, had become hostile territory overnight. By the time the war entered its final phase, the P-38's reputation was beyond dispute. It had escorted bombers across the vast Pacific, hunted enemy aircraft at altitudes the Zero could only dream of reaching, sunk ships, strafed airfields, and crippled supply routes. And through it all, it carried the same message. The era of Japanese aerial dominance was over. Those who had mocked the Lightning in its early days were now watching their air force collapse. Not because of a single pilot or a single tactic, but because the P-38 represented a level of industrial and technological power Japan could not match. Even decades later, surviving Japanese pilots spoke of the Lightning with a mixture of respect and quiet dread. They remembered the sound of its twin engines approaching from above, the moment sunlight flashed off its wings, and the realization that they were up against a machine that erased every advantage they once held. To them, the P-38 was not just an aircraft, it was the turning point, the moment when the sky itself shifted sides. And in that shift, the Japanese Air Force learned a brutal truth. Underestimating the Lightning had cost them the Pacific.